Most important court case in the history of sports marketing, certainly in American sports, just reached a settlement here in the United States, and the House Settlement, which will decide ultimately the future of college sports and try to rectify some of the wrongs of the past. We have finally begun to address one of the biggest injustices in American sports life, and that's college athletes being able to earn a living. 3 years ago, NIL passed, that's name, image, and likeness, that allows athletes to earn their American and God-given right to earn money based on their marketability and recognizability of their name. So today, I'm gonna walk you through what NIL is, what all the fuss is about, how we got here, and then what the future of NIL and the rest of the sports marketing landscape may look like, because this has wide-ranging implications for the rest of our sports marketing ecosystem. I'm gonna give you the 5 winners and 5 losers based upon this new settlement in the future of college sports. So, let's dive in. First, what is NIL? NIL is name, image, and likeness. It is the terminology that we use when describing what athletes' marketability and their rights are. You have the right to your name, your image, and your likeness. So if anyone, like a company, or in this case, a university or other businesses, are trying to utilize your name, image, or likeness to promote themselves, you are entitled to compensation for that. We understand this inherently in the rest of American society, but for some reason, we have given college sports a pass, and it's gotten really muddy and murky because the NCAA has had a strategic and legal army fighting its battles for years, trying to hold on to the concept of amateurism. Amateurism is a concept that came from the late 1800s in Britain that was really rooted around preserving the aristocracy to compete in sports, not unlike what we're seeing in the Olympics tonight and this week, in things like fencing and boxing and wrestling and rugby, because the working class would often be able to beat them. They were stronger, they maybe had more grit, but if they needed to have a job or earn money or earn a living to provide for themselves, which most normal people do unless you come from a very wealthy family, then you need to earn money and you need to have a job. And so the aristocracy used this concept of amateurism to say that only people who play for the love of the game or who are amateurs and don't need to earn money are valid. And this concept was kind of twisted and distorted throughout American sports. And the NCAA has used this as a defense for why college athletes should not be able to be paid. And there is probably arguments to be made about which point this actually made sense. Scholarships do mean something. They are valuable if an athlete can get a college degree and get the education that they actually need. If you were to really dive deep onto the surface right now, if you see the professionalization of college sports, you'll actually see players are not getting the education that perhaps you or I got or think of in college. They are geared towards specific majors that will accommodate their sports activity and life. I know a young volleyball player who is not even a high revenue sport, so you can only imagine basketball or football. But this young volleyball player had interest in marketing and PR, but she had to take chemical engineering as a major because the PR and marketing courses would conflict with her volleyball practice schedule. And that is in a non-revenue sport, which we'll talk much more about. But the revenue sport in college athletics is college football. It is the one that drives the lion's share of the business, perhaps 75% of the revenue in college sports. And men's basketball makes some, and a couple of women's basketball programs might make money now, like a LSU or a South Carolina, maybe an Iowa, if they continue on the streak that they've been on with Caitlin Clark. The NCAA has been fighting these cases for years, and people have sued the NCAA for a long time. We have been having cries of injustice since the 1980s, since the 90s. The Fab Five were one of the big original athletes and groups of people that we could see had a real impact on culture and actually could have been part of a huge marketing machine. Nike made a ton of money off the Fab Five, selling all kinds of black socks and baggy shorts and cool Air Max basketball footwear. But the athletes weren't allowed to make anything, and in fact got their name tarnished and stripped of their records and wins because some of them had taken money, like Chris Webber. And so you could debate whether that should be rectified or recognized. Michigan did finally have them back just last year after everyone has finally admitted that what we've all known, or many of us have known for a long time, that this is the right that the athlete has, and we should have been paying them all along. And you could argue what size, how much, when is appropriate and when is not, but this is an American right. And college football specifically is the second biggest sport in all of America. Second to that is college football. And college football has been treated like a minor league for a really long time. It is the minor league of the NFL. You're required to stay in college sports for up to 3 years in football before you're allowed to be drafted. We've had that challenge before by Maurice Clarett, who has been an outspoken person against the NCAA, and his life was really thrown off. He probably could have gone to the league, but he wasn't allowed to. This has been an issue for a long time. I believe Johnny Manziel actually is the one who broke the dam and who actually showed us that we no longer could argue that athletes couldn't earn money anymore. And so fast forward, the states actually broke this through, but there's been a few different court cases, and one of them is the Ed O'Bannon case, where Ed O'Bannon is a former UCLA basketball player who joined together with Sonny Vaccaro, ironically the protagonist of the Air movie that was about Nike. Sonny Vaccaro was the man who recruited Michael Jordan to Nike, and he eventually went on to be a really big player in high school and college basketball. And after all these years of seeing how the sneaker companies made all this money off of these athletes and these athletes couldn't, he wanted to try to right some of those wrongs and joined Ed O'Bannon in this lawsuit against EA Sports and the NCAA for the right to his name, image, and likeness. He saw himself on a video game that his nephew was playing while he was a used car salesman in Arizona and thought that's not fair. And it wasn't. College athletes were having their likeness used and sold by EA Sports for years, and there was nothing they could do about it until finally they won this case. Then we had another case in California that basically broke this open, that signed the way and paved the way for athletes to be able to make money through their name, image, and likeness. And when all of it started breaking through and the states have started overruling the NCAA, they had to give in. So we now are on year 3 of name, image, and likeness, where college athletes are able to earn money by doing endorsements for companies. We've had all kinds of amazing things that have happened from this, and I'll give you some of those. We've also had a lot of challenges, and I just have to laugh because I think the free market finds a way in America. So one of the big challenges that happened was very quickly, boosters figured out that they could create something called the NIL Collective. And I will break down for you what an NIL Collective is, because this is probably the source of the biggest misunderstandings in all of college sports. So if you're a parent, if you're an aunt or uncle of a high school athlete or a college athlete, you need to know how NIL Collectives work. NIL Collectives are started by boosters. They create a shell company that basically exists to pay college athletes. And so they raise money from other boosters. Some have called themselves nonprofits to try to write it off as a charitable donation. A lot of those are getting challenged in courts. But for the sake of this conversation, they create a company that's called something. It is not officially related to the university, but they work very closely with the university. They usually share the same colors, and it's often an alumni or someone who left the college athletics administration at the partner school who's now running the collective. And the collective basically has now created a GM or salary cap manager to raise money to then pay players. Well, you're not allowed to pay players for play. That's one of the rules of the NCAA that has remained, is you're not allowed to pay players for play. So they bring in players to promote things for this collective. There are some collectives who are doing legit work, and I've seen many of them, but most are basically just making up things for athletes to do so that they can pay them in exchange for them coming to that school, or now the big challenge is retaining them to stay at that school, because the transfer portal is now, again, been challenged in court because it is unjust historically. If players transferred, they would have to sit out. Meanwhile, coaches were allowed to break promises, get paid bigger money, leave their school on a moment's notice, and athletes would be stuck out. So we finally now have equal rights in this ecosystem, mostly, but it's created a lot of problems because now we essentially have perpetual free agency year after year. So you have a collective who is paying athletes to promote things that ultimately just lead back to people finding out about this collective. So if I finish that chart, we have collectives paying athletes who are doing things to promote the collective, and the collective raises money from big boosters and small boosters. And the marketing efforts are largely tied to raising awareness and driving interest from small boosters to pitch into the collective so that they can raise more money, so they can pay more players more money. Because now the recruiting arms race is all about who can pay who the most. And there are a lot of cynics and a lot of people who hate this and don't like it at all. It is basically what professional sports is, except they don't have unions yet and they haven't collectively bargained. And I won't spend a lot of time on that today because there are challenges. When athletes can come together, like every pro league, the athlete has a union and they're able to form together to get certain rights and certain baseline treatment and things, and are able to lobby together to get better rights and better treatment. Right now, it's all every man and woman for themselves in this kind of dog-eat-dog world. And so that has been one of the bigger challenges over the last 3 years is how do you deal with this? Because the one single rule that is like you can't pay players for their athletic ability, you can pay them for their marketability. All of these collectives have just zoomed right around. Many of these athletes have zero marketability. They haven't put any effort into their marketing efforts. They may or may not have a large following. Usually the advertisements and the marketing material for these are awful, absolutely terrible, and they are not effective. But people want their team to win. And who am I to talk them out of it? I think it's an example of the free market at work doing pretty creative things. All right, so we've had 3 years of that. They've been battling in court. We had the video game case. Meanwhile, we've been having all of these schools and conference realignments. Things have gotten totally crazy. There are now just a couple of really big, powerful conferences. The Big Ten negotiated a $1 billion deal just a couple of years ago. The CFP now is operating outside of the NCAA, but the CFP and ESPN pays $500 million per year to broadcast the college football playoff. And now they've expanded that into a 16-team playoff, which we'll get next year for the first time. So there is tons and tons and tons of money being poured into college sports. For years, schools have been building these Taj Mahal stadiums. They have been doing all kinds of backflips every which way to pay every single person except the college athlete. And so we've arrived at this really weird place now where we have this breakneck issues where overnight these athletes are now able to be paid, and we have collectives and we have all of this. So there's been a case that has been all the way up to the House. People have been asking for Congress to help figure this out because the NCAA has been trying to retain some of their power. And so now they have settled, and there's a proposed $2.7 billion in back pay that they owe athletes of years past. None of the ones that I mentioned, like Manziel or the Fab Five, will be able to get paid, but athletes from June of 2016 will be able to be paid out across 3 categories and 3 fund buckets. 1 across broadcast, 2 video games, and 3 on missed opportunities in NIL. And so the back pay are for people who did not get a portion of the broadcast revenue, which they now will be in the future. Also getting a piece of ticket sales and all kinds of money that the universities are bringing in. Second will be the video game cases. A lot of these athletes were not paid for their likeness used in the video game case that I mentioned previously. And third, for missed opportunities in NIL here in the past. So there are some interesting numbers. Mitt Winter on Twitter has done a great thread breaking this case down. The Business of College Sports and Christy Dosh does some great reporting on this as well. And so across those 3 areas, the average, I'm not going to bore you with all the specifics, you can go check either of them out, but average payout for previous men's football and basketball players could be up to around $135,000. Women's basketball would be around $35,000, and any other college sport there in the Power Five, it's in the hundreds or thousands, but those top three are really the sports that actually make revenue, and so there's actual money to be recouped. Some of those men's football players and basketball can go back and get up to about $2 million, but they are certainly the exception and not the rule. And to be clear, most of this conversation is talking about the big programs in the Power Five. All Division II and Division III, those schools are going to have to figure out a lot of that. But in this context, I am talking about the big power programs. All right, so now there will be revenue sharing, and colleges are bringing NIL in-house, which is just ridiculous. I'm going to spare you a lot of the specifics here, but colleges will now bring NIL services and can act as marketing agents and represent players for name, image, and likeness. They will now be sharing that revenue, and each college will have up to $23 million in a salary cap, essentially. They're not going to be able to call it a salary. It's going to be for name, image, and likeness promotion of companies, businesses, or the school in conjunction with other sponsors that are already paying the school or just for the school or any number of things. But they're trying to avoid to say that they're paying the players for their play. They absolutely are, but we're not allowed to say that because we still have to play this charade over marketability. And certainly some portion of this is around marketability, but most of this is that athletes have incredible talents that people want to come and see. And so, yes, brands will be winners from this and are able to partner with athletes, and the athletes benefit from this as well. So do the schools. It's rising tide raises all ships, and so a lot of people view this as a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game. We are growing a massive pie, but there are going to be some losers in this. So I'm going to turn to now who are the 5 winners and the 5 losers in the future of this NIL landscape. It's super important in American sports. Now that we have the House settlement and college athletes are due $2.7 billion in back pay, and schools now will have a $23 million salary cap, and there will now be revenue sharing with athletes as well, we got to talk about the winners and losers in the future. So now I'm going to tell you 5 winners and 5 losers based on the new model of college athletics and where we're headed. The first and probably most obvious is athletes. Athletes are going to benefit hugely by this. They finally get the right to their name, image, and likeness, which is an American right. And I do not know why we're even having this conversation. It is so weird to basically explain basic American rights, but here we are. Athletes finally get the right to their name, image, and likeness. There are more scholarships available across all sports in this new settlement. And so that will benefit some athletes, and there is a lot of money pouring into college sports now. Athletes will be able to be big beneficiaries by being able to partner with brands, be able to get their NIL, their name, image, and likeness out there to raise their tide. You're seeing this right now with the Olympics. Alona Mar is a women's rugby player who has grown 800,000 followers just in the last week. That's a great example of an athlete capitalizing upon her name, image, and likeness. She's utilizing social media. She's become a big star, and she has the opportunity to raise her earning potential and her future and provide. And that is a right that we should all have as Americans. The other benefit that athletes get, and we've already seen this just 3 years into NIL, many of these athletes who previously felt like they needed to jump to the pros to make money finally, and sometimes they rushed out. You would see this in the NFL a lot of times. They would go out after 3 years when they could use another year or two. The college basketball has a one and done rule where you have to go for at least 1 year. And a lot of times you see athletes jump right after 1 year, but they probably could use another year or two to develop in college. And NIL now gives them a really good example and a really good opportunity to do this. And we've seen this with several players. The second winner in the future of college athletics is brands. Brands are getting to partner with these athletes at a much earlier age. I haven't even mentioned this yet, but 37 states now allow for NIL in high school. And so brands are getting to partner with these athletes earlier and earlier, and they're getting to realize some of the upside as well. We just had women's basketball is having a moment, and it is completely dependent upon NIL in college sports. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese became rivals after being at their universities for several years and meeting each other several times on big stages. And that attention has translated all the way to the W. When those two athletes square up in the WNBA, they have the highest ratings of anyone all year. And so the brands now that are attached to these athletes, Caitlin Clark has a Nike deal, Angel Reese has a Reebok deal, they are able to rise with these athletes as well. So Nike got a lot of shine for a lot of big campaign that they were doing around Caitlin Clark last year. There are all kinds of brands who partner with these athletes who are beneficiaries. They also are able to get athletes at a better rate. Previously, when you only had pro athletes to pick from, that floor was probably still pretty high. And now you're able to go and partner with athletes on smaller budgets and take some risk and see which ones pan out. And nowhere near everyone is a Caitlin Clark or an Angel Reese, but you can certainly find them out there. All right, the third winner from the future of college sports is lawyers. They are going to continue to win. Just this House settlement alone, the lawyers are billing $500 million. And this case settles is a really strong word. This is not going to settle almost anything. It will provide a new playbook and it will give some guardrails, but all of these things are still going to be challenged in court. The NCAA still has a lot of power here. Athletes still don't have enough rights. They don't have a union. There are all kinds of things that are going to be challenged, and lawyers are going to continue to win because they're going to continue to fight. And the NCAA has had lawyers on retainer for years and paid them tens and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to defend their court cases, but they keep losing. All right, the other winner in the future is going to be private equity. So we've seen some rumblings last year that Florida State, who rumored to want to be able to get out of the ACC, they are one of the biggest schools in that conference, and there's this mass land grab and this musical chairs game in the panic of conference realignment, and they don't want to be left out. But they're committed to the ACC over a long period of time. So private equity is entering the conversation to potentially back them to get out of that deal because they'd have to pay $120 million or something like that. And then try to treat these teams more like professionals and help raise the valuation so that they can get money back. In fact, this week alone, we have the Howard basketball men's coach who has said that his team is going to try to raise money from private equity at a valuation of $100 million. And they want to use that money to improve their facilities and pay players a salary range so that they can compete and get some of the best players in the country. And this is really innovative, interesting thinking. It will challenge a lot of our old ideals and things that many people have come to love about college athletics. But you are going to really need innovative thinkers and processes like that. And I think private equity is going to continue to play and get its fingers into college sports because it's touched every other aspect of professional sports as well. The fifth winner of this is female athletes and female sports in general. I just told you about the incredible rise that we have seen about female athletes taking advantage of these new opportunities that they're getting. Brands help athletes raise their profile just as much as athletes help brands raise their profile and awareness. And so in the best relationships, those work together and both rise. This is amazing to see. The WNBA has finally had the trickle effect from the college sports fervor and fandom, and they're breaking every record known to man or woman this year. And so I think you're going to continue to see female sports do really well. One of the second order effects that I think could be really interesting, if you're unfamiliar, Title IX is legislation that came in the 70s that essentially said that for every dollar and every opportunity you're providing a male athlete in college sports for any organization that is federally funded, which many of these universities are, if you're going to take dollars from the federal government, then you have to provide women the same opportunity as men. And so men's biggest sport is football, which has a roster of like 120 people. And so the cynical side of this is that a lot of women's sports have stacked up. You have everything from gymnastics to tumbling to women's basketball to volleyball to equestrian, rowing, all kinds of sports. Soccer is a big women's sport, lacrosse. All of these are essentially stacking up so that you can match up against a men's football and basketball roster to continue to justify their experience. And so maybe that's a cynical take, but one of the big upsides that could happen is if some of these schools generously interpret Title IX to say that for every dollar they pay a man, they have to pay a woman. And so if you have a high school female athlete who's competing in one of these bigger sports, like let's say basketball, gymnastics, volleyball, they've all done well in the NIL game. They could potentially stand to make a lot of money if schools interpret Title IX to mean $1 for every dollar they pay a man, they pay a woman as well. That could be a real interesting implication. Also, they are going to keep those female sports around so that they can continue to have the big money drivers, which is football and men's basketball and some women's basketball. And so now that turns us to the losers. Who are the losers of the future of college sports? Well, the first is pro athletes. So pro athletes had the lion's share of endorsement deals previously. They could drive up their market rate. And now I think you're going to continue to see brands spreading out that dollar spend from some pro athletes and now to some college athletes and to some high school athletes as well. So I think pro athletes are missing out on a little bit. This pie is growing. It is not a zero-sum game, so let's not cry too much for pro athletes. Second is coaches. Coaches have benefited greatly in college sports, and we're talking primarily men's football and men's basketball here. We had Nick Saban making $10 million a year. You have several of those big SEC coaches making upwards of $10 million. Meanwhile, you had players making zero, playing for them every year. And so that delta is now going to get closer and closer. So that disparity of let's say $10 million to zero is going to get smaller and smaller. We just had a female softball player get a rumored $1 million deal, and that is one of the least of the big sports. And so right now, one of the going rates for a quarterback is $1 to $2 million in a big Power 5 school, and a great recruit in basketball will cost you $1 to $2 million in the transfer portal as well. College basketball coaches are making, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 million a year. And so that delta is going to get closer and closer. Whereas previously, the old era of the Nick Sabans of the world and the Gary Pattersons who had full control over all these athletes and no one could question them at all, that day is going to be gone. And now these players have more and more power, and some of them will be paid as much as their coach. All right, the third loser of the future of college athletics is going to be athletic administrators and headcount and headaches. So first, these are huge headaches for the people who work inside college sports. I am sympathetic to some of them. I think a lot of them are trying to do great work. I also want to acknowledge that we've had a growing injustice for 50 years, and when the dam breaks, there's going to be some water spilt. And so this is just the consequences that we have over a long time of injustice being righted. Unfortunately, that is probably, we've seen bloating in every area. We'll talk about facilities in a second, but administrations is one of them. And so we have strength and conditioning coaches making $1 million. No shots at them specifically. They're definitely very valuable. We have massive creative teams. You have all kind of administration everywhere. I think they are going to get cut. You just saw a new athletic director come into A&M, and knowing that they're now going to have to pay $23 million a year to athletes, they have to pull that budget from somewhere. And so that is going to be, for some of the administration, is going to go by the wayside. And that leads me to facilities. Facilities are going to take a hit. Perhaps facility builders, people who have been making a very good living over the last 20 years. In the arms race for college athletics, since you couldn't pay athletes and recruits directly, we have had all kinds of silly games that have popped up and huge businesses that have popped up to try to entice recruits in general. So that's like the recruiting process, which I think will get simpler. It'll be, how much can you pay me? These facilities you're not going to have to build lazy rivers around your locker room because the money is going to talk most directly to the athlete. I've said for years that instead of putting a flat screen TV and a PlayStation in every player's locker, I think they would rather a few $1,000s in their pocket. And now they are getting up to a couple of $1 million in their pocket. So that will do the large portion of the talking, and facilities will not be this crazy necessary thing to try to woo recruits. You saw this with Colorado. Colorado has okay facilities, but nowhere near competitive facilities. But they had enough money raised through NIL, and they have an electric personality like Dion and Coach Prime, who has gotten the athletes there. So there will be different ways to compete now that are not just requiring the craziest facilities in the world. Lastly, I think men's smaller sports are going to be the losers in this future. So they're not going to be able to pay for these smaller sports off the backs of football and basketball players anymore. And so those men's team sports, club sports, men's soccer, men's, who knows, lacrosse or cross country or rowing or things like that, equestrian, maybe going by the wayside because they can't eliminate the female sports due to Title IX. And so those smaller men's sports will probably be eliminated. And lastly, the Olympic pipeline, which is closely related to that. There are a lot of people who are raising the alarm about the Olympic pipeline, which essentially American universities have paved the way for. And unfortunately, those Olympic athletes, again, everyone in college athletics has been funded and paid for off the backs of the free labor of football. And that gig is up. And so there are going to be some consequences to this. So this month during the Olympics, where the Americans dominate, we don't have a Olympic pipeline and system like other countries do that are funded federally through the government. Ours are funded through American universities. So all the best gymnasts and swimmers and all of these athletes go through the university system. And so there will be real interesting implications that may happen there as well. And other companies like the Olympic Committee who may have to come in the United States and support some of these athletes. That is my roundup here through NIL. I love this stuff. I follow it really closely. And if you care about sports marketing, you should definitely be following this closely. It is fundamental to the rights of athletes, and it has big implications on all of the opportunities that are coming around sports, particularly in the United States. So thanks for tuning into this YouTube channel. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I've been using my experience in the sports marketing industry to try to teach you. If you love this stuff and you want a career in sports marketing, I have a workshop at a link below. It's $97. It'll give you all my wisdom about how to land a dream job working in industries like this. And closely related to this topic of NIL, I teach personal branding. So I have a workshop called Branding and Blessings for people who want to understand their personal brand, their story, how they can show up and use their platform to serve others. I believe the best brands are built on serving others. And I've traveled the country teaching college athletes for the last 2 years how to do this and how to maximize the impact that they can have, both with companies, but in their lives and the lives of others as well. So if you're interested in either of those, check the links out below. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.